Okay, welcome, everyone. This is the August 20th IDA meeting, and we have a quorum, so we'll get started. Let's begin with the meeting minutes of the last meeting, which was June 11th. Does anyone have a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved.
And
I'll second.
are there any changes, adjustments, modifications? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We have accepted the minutes. Item number 2. Mr. Kernan, can you take us through the financial statements?
Yes, thank you. What I'll present this morning is a summary review of May and June 2024. Starting off with the comparative balance sheet. Again, this is as of May 31st. Total assets measured $4,140,000 on May 31st. That's an increase of $23,000 from our April 30th position. Total liabilities and equity measured $4,140,000 and May 31st, an increase equal to the change in our asset base. Again, from May through April, net change is $23,000. On the P&L side, total ordinary income at the end of May measured $111,672. That's an increase of $58,000 from April 30th. Total ordinary expenses measured $200,778 on May 31st, an increase of $37,000 from our April 30th position. Net ordinary income measured minus $89,106 on May 31st. That's actually an improvement of $21,630 from our April 30th position. Total other income measured 0 on May 31st. That's no change from April. Total other expenses measured 0 as well on May 31st. No change from our April 30th position. Net income, bottom line, measured $89,106 minus on May 31st. Again, an improvement of $21,630 from our April 30th position. When we look at June 30th, 2024, total assets measured $5,578,000 on June 30th, an increase of $1,437,000 from May 31st. Most of that is due to the influx of pilot payments, which came in at the end of June. They would be then dispersed in our July numbers. So when we look at balance sheets between July and June, you'll see a negative change in the overall total numbers due to that one position. Total liabilities and equity measured again $5,578,000 on June 30th. A net change of $1,437,000 from our May position. On the P&L side, total ordinary income measured $211,944 on June 30th, an increase of $100,000 from our May 31st position. Total ordinary expenses measured $230,000 on May 30th, an increase of $29,000 from our May 31st position. Net ordinary income and loss, in this case, at the end of June, measured $18,143 on June 30th. That's an improvement of $70,963 from our May 31st position. Total other income measured 0 on May 31st. No change from our April position, and total other expenses measured 0 again on May 31st. No change from the May 31st position. Net income was $18,143 negative on June 30th. Again, an improvement of $70,963 on May 31st. I also included in the meeting packet analysis of our budget through June 30th compared to actual. When we look at revenues on a budgeted basis, we had budgeted $1,318,000 in administrative fees. That included $1,282,000 for the Twirlinkle Solar project. That probably will not occur this year.
Doesn't seem
And
like it.
when we do our budget for 2025, we're gonna have to look at that again and see what the reality is, whether that's gonna take place or not.
Do we know anything about why this is just dragging on?
Sarah, can you add some flavor to that?
Maybe, well,
I don't know, I mean, it's, the last communication I had with the other council is that they were evaluating the project and it had been delayed and you get back to me. I haven't heard anything of substance
since,
since.
The last I heard, I mean, this was, I've spoken with them more recently than this, but I don't have any more recent updates. But the last update I had was essentially that this project has taken so long and from when they originally applied to the state, because this is utility scale solar, so they have to apply to NYSERDA for their contracting rates. That there was such a delay between when that was first done in 2019 and now that things changed significantly for them, and essentially they asked NYSERDA to re-bid the contract. So that did happen, I believe, last fall, but I don't know where that stands now, in terms of their ability or willingness to move forward with the project. So we'll keep everybody updated, but there really isn't much news.
Going forward, our total operating revenues through June measure $211,000. That was compared to a budget for 2024 of $1,529,000, including the Twirlinkle solar project. That's a net variance of $1,317,000, and on a percentage basis, our revenues actual compared to our budget were at 13.86%. And that Trevino number has a major impact on that difference. On the operating expense side, we had budgeted $1,018,000 for the 2024 budget. I'm sorry, the operating expenses were budgeted at $510,000. Our actual through June was $230,000, a variance of $280,000 negative variance, and our percentage of actual to budget at the end of June measured 45%. For 6 months of the year, that would normally be a benchmark of 50%. So we're running pretty close to budget on our expenses. The net operating income or loss, again for 2024, was budgeted at $1,018,000. At the end of June, it actually measured a minus $18,000. And the variance there would be $1,036,000 at the June timeframe. There is no other income through June, and there is no other expenses through June. Although we did expense site development costs for 2024 to being $50,000. The bottom line, our net through June was a minus $18,000 compared to an annual budget of $968,000. A variance of $986,000. And again, the Trevino number has an impact of significance in that difference. The graphs that were prepared for June in particular, I would point out that when we look at the summary graph by quarters, the total assets, again, at the end of the second quarter of 2024, measured $5,578,000. That number will change dramatically when we do our July numbers, because the pilot payments that came in late June were then dispersed as a July item. So you'll see a dramatic change in the overall balance sheet totals when we do our July reporting. Again, that's a quick summary of our numbers. There's a lot of detail for those two periods, and if there are any questions regarding that, I'd be happy to try to answer them for you.
Questions for
2 months of
Bob?
activities.
Yes.
Can I do a quick thumbnail sketch of all that
Certainly.
detail that Bob just gave, please?
Sure.
So, Del Lago's payment of that 1.4 is what really distorts a lot of this data that we've got in here, because it shows up big and then it's gonna go away big. So what we were talking about is we're closer to like 3,890,000 as our net worth right now, not the 5 million that you see in there. And our expenses, surprisingly, after we moved into this building, have really stayed steady. And I'm expecting that our overhead's gonna go up a lot with the light and the heat that we've gotta deal with in this building. But we've yet to actually establish a real good track record on that, so we'll just see that going forward. And we also have the Gould's payment is gonna be coming through too, isn't it? They're gonna distort us, that 400,000, their new
When
payment to
was
the
that
schools.
paid again, Kelly, was that?
It was 600,000 and
600,000.
it probably will show in July.
In July.
And then it was, but we also paid that one out in July?
Yes.
Okay,
So it'll not distort anything between
okay. It
months.
just goes in and goes out.
Mhm.
All right. So that's all I wanted to say. It's just, we've got uncertainties in the budgeting going forward, particularly about the construction costs that we're talking about. I mean, those costs are fixed, but the question then becomes, are we gonna pay for that out of our own funds, or are we going to try and finance it?
That's a decision.
That's a decision yet to be made.
Right.
That's it.
You know, I look at these numbers and see these huge lumps in income and outgo. And that's kind of distorts kind of what the underlying
Right.
operating
Right.
performance of the
Mhm.
organization is. And, you know, to me, those are nice, and we can expect them, but shouldn't run our business on them. I think one of the things that is going to be included in Sarah's quarterly report is an estimate of what our business could look like if we were not ignoring those large agreements, but looking at sort of the underlying economic basis for the county. And you know, right now, it's not that pretty, I would say, if you look at those numbers, because we're not seeing a deal flow from that small and medium-sized business community that would like to see. You know, one of the questions I have is, how much of that is related to general economic conditions, uncertainty? I know in the tourism business, at least among the businesses that I know well, nobody is up, not a single winery in terms of revenue year over year is showing year over year growth. And that's one data point in larger picture, but I think we're not seeing a robust economic environment for the small and medium-sized business. Unless I'm missing something. Does anybody, you're not in a small and medium-sized business, so that wouldn't apply, to my knowledge. Tom, anybody else in the small and medium-sized business think?
I think that's a general consensus, Bruce.
Yeah.
I mean, the ones I've talked to are generally down.
Yeah, not terrifically, nobody's sort of panicking.
No.
It's just that after several years of growth,
Yeah.
to see kind of a reset and a correction, and people, I think, expect that, but they're just kind of weathering it right now.
Would you think this is the shadow of the pandemic capital infusion?
Partly, yeah, I think it is, yeah. People were feeling pretty flush for a while.
Yeah.
And that certainly, when it comes to discretionary spending, that certainly is one of the first places people begin to kind of rein it in. So, maybe a little bit more on this, when Sarah gives a report, she can talk about how she's doing her estimate of revenues, and it's not based on the Trilinas of the world, I hope. Yeah, okay, anyone,
When you look
anyone
at the
else?
budget, the one line item that distorts it is the solar project.
Yes, yeah.
When you look at the expenses compared to actual,
We're about on.
yeah.
Yeah. Any other comments, questions for Bob? Is there a motion to accept the financial report?
Yeah, I'll move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. That's approved. Thank you, Bob, again. Sarah, you're next, I think.
Yes. So the next item on the agenda is a discussion and approval of the lease and sublease between the Seneca County IDA and the Seneca County EDC. So this is something that's already been discussed by the EDC board, which consists of Steve, Tom Kime, and Jeff Shipley. And it really pertains to this office space and to the proposed renovation project. So we've discussed this, or at least mentioned this before in previous board meetings, that the EDC had applied for a New York State grant through this year's consolidated funding application process, with the hopes that if that's successful, it can be used to fund part of the office renovation. Obviously, as the owner of the building, the IDA is sort of the one with all the, legal rights and obligations. So in order to allow some flexibility for us and to have the potential for the EDC to fund and manage the renovation, I spoke with Rob, and essentially he proposed drafting a lease and then a sublease back between the two agencies. So essentially this is, the IDA would lease the building to the EDC, and then the EDC sort of leases it back to the IDA. So both entities have legal rights to use it, have legal rights to make changes to it if needed, but it essentially gives the EDC some ownership stakes so that if we're successful in that grant application, the project can move forward. Feel free, Rob, to jump in if there's anything that I missed that you think is worth noting.
No, I think that gets it. I mean, it's basically a vehicle to facilitate the grant funding, so.
Because the grant funding had to go through the EDC, not the IDA.
Right.
Correct.
Questions? The lease is there. Are we prepared to vote on approving?
Yes, and just as Sarah said, the EDC met last week, and Tom, Jeff, and I reviewed this, and after some discussion, yeah, we approved this and thought it was the proper way to go. So it's already been approved by the EDC, just waiting for the IDA.
And just as a reminder, the expected cost of the renovations are,
It's like 167,000, I believe,
okay, have there
but
been?
that's not, we don't have bids yet or anything like that, so that was the first initial estimate.
All right.
So we're leasing the whole building, not just a portion of it, and then back again? Okay.
All right, do we have a motion to approve the lease?
I'll make the
Ben?
motion.
Second, all in favor, or it's a roll call here. Kelly, I think.
Mr. Bruzo,
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray,
Yes.
Mr. Lat,
Yes.
Mr. Guthrie,
Yes.
Mr. Kircher,
Yes.
Mr. Brownell,
Yes.
Mr. Tom Murray,
Yes.
Mr. Kine, and Mr. Shipley, absent, motion carried.
Okay, thanks, everyone. Next is the review of the EDA revolving loan fund semi-annual report.
Okay, so this is something that we have to submit twice a year to the federal government. The U.S. Economic Development Administration is the agency that helped to capitalize the start of our revolving loan fund that's managed by the IDA. So we like to, when those reports get submitted to them, we like to share that with you all and just kind of take the opportunity to walk through how our loans are doing. So just as a refresher to those that may not be as familiar with this, the EDA funding to initially capitalize this was $540,000. There was a local match of $260,000 for initial revolving loan funding of $800,000. Okay.
And that was back,
I always get this question and I never remember the answer. It was back in
like the,
1990s or something, wasn't it?
1990s.
Probably.
Okay, that's all I
Goes back
needed,
a
just
while.
generally.
Yeah, it was a long
It's
time
at least
ago.
30 years.
The local match came from the supervisors?
1999.
That's a great question, and I'm not sure where the local
I
match
don't
came
know.
from initially. I don't believe it was well, I guess it could have been the IDA maybe at the time, I'm not sure. There are now rules that IDAs cannot loan or grant their own funds.
Mhm.
We're allowed to manage this because it's not our agency fees going into it, but in the 90s, that was before a lot of the reforms were made, so it's possible that it was some IDA funds at the time.
My presumption is that's where it came from.
So interest, we have earned just over $401,000 in interest on loans since the start of this fund. $30,000 in interest from the savings accounts that the loan funds are kept in. $5,400 on closing loans. Application fees, $250. That's because in large part in the past, the application fees weren't properly billed or administered, but we had changed that, but we don't have a lot of loan activity, so essentially you're seeing one loan recently. Other RLF income, $3,000. What's in the other income, Kelly? I'm never sure with that one.
It's just, if there's a late fee, things like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. So our total income since we've been managing this fund has been $440,831. Approximately 73,000 of that has been portioned off as administrative expense, so there's things like underwriting and other
Audits. things like
audits
that.
and things that can come out of the loan fund. Leaving us with essentially a net of $368,000 that has been put back into the loan fund for additional lending, which brings us to a current capital base of $1.168 million. We still have about $204,000 outstanding in principal on our current loans. We only have 2 current loans, so there's not, many out currently. Leaving us with $963,000 available in cash on hand to lend out. There is a small amount, almost $1,500 that's been committed but not dispersed. That was because, I think it was the Schrader Farms loan, if I'm not mistaken. Disbursements were made based on invoices submitted to us, and I think some of the equipment and things that were purchased were not as expensive, for loan purposes, they did round numbers, but, so we'll take care of that, with the accounting and final payouts of their loans, but it's unlikely that that'll actually get dispersed. So we, net of our commitments, essentially have right now $962,000 available to lend, meaning we've got over 82% of our fund on hand, which is not allowed by the EDA, we'll say that. they weren't monitoring as closely during COVID. In the past, they would give us notice, you know, if we had too large of a threshold of cash on hand. You know, we've been trying to make efforts to get more funds out in the community, but it's not been particularly easy.
So
Especially
there's-
when, just in general, projects, as Bruce mentioned, are very sort of slow right now. You know, business has kind of dropped off for some people. They're not really making big investments like they were.
So they're kind of saying we should be giving the money out, like at no interest?
No, it's more that we're supposed to have, I think somewhere in here it lists what our allowable threshold is, if I'm not mistaken. It's significantly lower than what we have.
They just want to incentivize you to.
Our
have-
allowable cash percentage is 17.4%.
Wow.
Yeah. Our maximum loan amount, just so everybody knows, is $250,000. It is tied to job creation and retention, so it's $35,000 per job created or retained. It's one of those things, you know, part of it's education, and we hope to do more education, not just to the business community, but also to the banking community, so people know that we're here as a service. I mean, our interest rates are the lower of 3/4 of prime or 4%. So with how high prime has been, our interest rate right now on a loan would be 4% fixed. But even still, just, you know, the size of the loans, the fact that they're targeted towards smaller businesses, the fact that people are not making investments in equipment and things the same way that they maybe would have a couple of years ago has led to sort of a slowdown. And in an already sort of small community, you know, we have a lot of loan funds on hand. So that's definitely a problem that we need to look into more and figure out how to address. There's been the possibility over the past couple of years for us to actually defederalize our loan program. We'd have to apply to EDA to do so. It would mean that we wouldn't have to do our federal single audits and all that anymore.
Was there a time, Steve, when this was more active? It was sort of a more top of mind part of the IDA's activity?
I don't know if I'd say that, Bob.
No,
I think, looking at the very end, there was 20 loans
There's been 20 loans in
over
total,
maybe 30 years, which
right.
is not
That's-
very
is
many.
not.
It's almost like,
On the
part
back
of-
page, you can see all the loans.
Yeah. Although,
So, Bob, would this be considered competition for the local banks at a very low interest rate?
I think there's an advantage with it.
I mean, we're not direct competition to banks. This program is a gap financing mechanism, which is the other thing. So a company, if they want to apply for our funds, they have to go to a bank first.
And,
And they have to
That's right.
show that either they can't get the full commitment for what they need, or that it's not feasible at the rates being offered, or that they can't get it at all. You know, they have to have some sort of commitment or declination letter from the bank in order to be able to apply for our funds.
So we're actually picking up higher risk portions of the
Yes,
business.
essentially, we're here to reduce the risk for the banks.
that's right.
Well, given that, the fact that the success rate looking at the list is really good. Nobody's defaulted, right? Over these years?
I guess looking at it that way.
Mhm.
I think what we did, there's a little bit more of a outreach to the banks, because I think that was part of it when, Tom was part of the conversation, Tom Kine with, because everything really needs to go through the banks first. And are the banks really saying, well, we can do so much, but then the IDA, essentially that's the perfect spot to in a sense, encourage this through the IDA. Because someone going to their bank, they have to go to the bank first before they come here, and it's a little bit of a messier procedural thing.
like putting the cart before the horse,
So.
to a certain degree.
It would be, definitely more advantageous if all the banking, entities really were fully aware and more aggressive on this too. That, there's something else.
Yeah, but there again, they could be kind of, well, they're still tied to it. They're not like farming the risky part of their debt out, because they're still taking it on too.
Yes, but then again, there's a little bit of the competition, because if it really looks good, why parcel out some of this to somebody else?
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit more difficult.
Any further questions? All right, next. Next is Jeff Shipley. Jeff's not here. Bernie, anything from the County Board of Supervisors that we should know?
I haven't got anything today, other than we're working on a budget. Everybody's, pushing for that with the head departments, so.
Other business. So a few items that I want to just report on. The county is in the process of forming a local development corporation. This is known as the LDC. LDCs are common in other counties. They basically are nonprofit, independent entities, typically focused on economic development. The initiative for the county's LDC started probably 6 months ago. MRB, the consulting firm, has been involved in drafting bylaws and articles of organization. Over the last 45 days, there was an ad placed to solicit interest in what could be a 7-member board of the LDC. The county has set aside a chunk of the ARPA money, about $250,000 initially, to fund this LDC. The interviews for the board members have taken place. I don't think they're quite concluded. I've been included on the interview committee, so I've sat through all these interviews. I would say it is pretty much the candidates are not what I would call the usual suspects in the county. There are some new faces, some people that I think can bring some new perspective to what's taking place in the county. The first order of business for this LDC will be to hire an executive director and an assistant. I think, as may be expected, a lot of the applicants, I think the mission, the day-to-day activities, the sort of the goals and all of the LDC will evolve based on whoever is chosen as not only the chair of the LDC board, but also whoever is chosen as an executive director. And then, it's been funded so far with $250,000. That LDC is going to have to find a way to fund itself beyond that, which is, I think, to be determined at this point. So that's coming. One of the first orders of business there is also the Willard project. And since our last meeting, the RFP, request for proposal, has gone out for the Willard project. The state of New York is pretty much driving the process. MRB, consulting firm, has drafted this RFP. It's available on the MRB website. The goal is to find one single master developer to take on the entire site, and that master developer would then be expected to work with what are known as potential development partners. The potential development partners are smaller entities that might want a piece of that area and not be able, or not be large enough to take the whole thing. Sarah's been leading the Willard Task Force over the last, holding monthly meetings, which I think are incredibly informative. One of the July meeting in particular included a presentation from the regional representative of SHPO, S-H-P-O, the State Historical Preservation Office.
Mhm.
And there is one person who really oversees how SHPO is involved with the development at Willard. The Willard site is designated as eligible for the National Registry of Historic Places. I'm gonna get to why this is important. However, it's not been listed on the National Registry of Historic Places. In order for anyone who's a developer to do historical preservation and also receive tax credits for that spending, the site has to be listed and not eligible for, on the National Registry of Historic Places. Bear with me here, this is a little kind of torturous, but one of the few entities that responded to the original request for expressions of interest. This was a kind of floating, who's interested in coming here? There was a historical preservation developer from Syracuse called La Hinch. Long list of places that they've redeveloped. And I had a call with the general partner there, and I said, number one, tell me about how you look at the Willard project as a historical preservationist. And then number two, how important are these, are the tax credits for allowing you to proceed with this restoration? The principal of this firm said, number one, no one is gonna proceed with any historical restoration until it's clear what SHPO has said is acceptable and what is not acceptable when it comes to modifications of the site. And so it's like a shovel-ready site. It's not shovel-ready until SHPO has said, okay, red light over here, green light over here. This is what you can do, this is what you must comply with. That's a big process.
Yeah, how granular is the detail?
I think, in fact, it may depend on the individual that was on the call in July, or maybe a committee, but I got the feeling that it was an individual now. To the extent that this site would be developed, at least in part, by some historical preservation developer, there's a long road to get it shovel-ready for that historical preservationist developer. These are the kinds of things that are getting uncovered simply by having the meeting with the right people and learning that, oh yeah, you're listed, but you're eligible, but you're not listed. And I think what we're going to find is there's a lot of that. And to the extent that this is going to be a successful undertaking, somebody's got to be, manning the oars to move these things forward. And I think Sarah definitely has been leading the charge on that. And to her credit, really, I think no one else is doing that kind of work right now. Second, there was a tour of the site that was designed for prospective developers, and I was not on the tour, I was out of town, but you want to kind of summarize who attended and what what the general tenor of that tour was.
Sure. So I was asked to lead the tour last week for prospective developers as part of the request for proposals process. We had individuals from, trying to make sure I don't forget anybody. A company called Acadia Energy.
It's a solar
That's a, yeah, utility
scale.
developer, renewable energy space, solar and other things as well. We had an architect, and I'm blanking right now on the name of the firm, but he was a historic preservation architect out of the Syracuse area. We had, oh my gosh, it was only last week, I'm already forgetting.
Bruce Sherman.
Yeah, Bruce Sherman from Sessler Companies.
Housing. There was the housing, the land bank.
Oh, Joe McGrath came as well from the county planning department and to represent the land bank, yes. And then a few, MRB had a representative, we had some folks there.
The net, I think, is if you are looking at sales prospects, and if it's the CEO of $1 billion company wanting to come and see and give one last blessing to the project, we didn't see any of those. Were there any subordinates, senior vice presidents, managers, individual representatives of private development corporations? None to speak of.
Well, the architect from Syracuse, his card said president, so.
Well, he's
Yes,
an
but
architect.
they're not-
He gets
yeah.
hired by a developer. He would get hired by a developer.
Okay.
So I guess
And he took a lot of notes.
I think the takeaway here is, right now, there's not a groundswell behind development here at this site. Not a surprise. There's a lot of hurdles, there's a lot of complexity to it. The RFP is due back, or the proposals in response to the RFP are due back on October 15th. One of the options, considering the current amount of interest in the site, would be to consider pushing that RFP deadline back, and then having a little bit more concerted effort to try to locate prospective developer partners.
What's the deadline now? What's the date?
October 15th. And needless to say, at the present time, the only effort that is, the effort that's going to solicit more interest is either coming from the IDA's small team, or simply the way that any large-scale real estate project gets advertised. Question for the board is again, we're not gonna make any final decisions, is I personally think the IDA's team, Sarah, David, Kelly, I've been very involved in this, is trying to move the process forward as much as possible. And there's no resistance, no one is resisting, and it's just a matter of arms and legs and hours in the day. And I guess I would ask, is there anyone on the board who feels like this is not time well spent? Because we could leave it to, the LDC, for instance, might be more responsible for something like this. There isn't even a board, there's no executive director. We're gonna get to October 15th, and there's gonna be no, again, one option, we don't know this for sure, but in the event we get to October 15th and there is no credible response to the RFP, we're kind of at square zero.
Do we anticipate what the state's response will be to no responses by October 15th?
So it's a really good question. The entities in the state are as follows. It's owned by DOCS, which is the Department of Corrections, essentially. It is being mothballed and not ignored by something called OGS, which is the Office of Government Services. And then it's being represented theoretically by ESD. And so the way we heard this described was Docs is the owner, OGS is the contract maintenance firm, and ESD is the real estate agent, broker, the representative right now. And ESD has sent out, as I understand it, Greater GRE, Greater Rochester Enterprise has sent out to their mailing list, hey, this is out there, this is out there. There's gotta be more than that.
Greater Rochester Enterprise has, ESD has not, and to my knowledge, will not. We've asked them a few times, and the response that we've received is because the RFP was not issued by Empire State Development, which would have required approval of their board and everything, and because the county did not enter into a memorandum of understanding or any kind of legal agreement with ESD, they're essentially not promoting the RFP.
Which is an issue that probably can get resolved by sitting down with the right people and having kind of a sort of a rational, appropriate, collaborative discussion.
Something we've been trying to work around. I haven't been able to get responses yet, but we're actively trying to do that. GRE was wonderful. They sent an email out to, I think it was 250 or 350 developers in their contact list, because they handle essentially on behalf of the Rochester Finger Lakes region, they handle all of the incoming business attraction prospects. So they have contacts with, site selectors and all kinds of other developers. I haven't had any contact with anybody that, received one of those emails. Realistically, don't know where that's gonna go in terms of leads for us. We've talked about strategies to generate other leads, but the problem is right now, we have obviously limited staff, and it really relies on us bringing in folks from other agencies and sort of divvying up the site into sections and having sort of teams tackle each section and trying to find not so much master developers, but potential development partners, the smaller folks.
And what, the way you normally would go about this kind of thing is if there was an email that went out to how many people, 250? Someone's gotta call every single one of them and get through to them and make a pitch and say, did you see the email? Do you have a moment to hear what this is all about? And that's 250 phone calls.
And I'll try to be as politically correct as possible here. But I think my biggest disappointment in this whole thing is the IDA, did a great job last year going through all the processes, the public hearings, getting the community together. End of the year, everything was going well, and then essentially the county wanted to take the lead on that, and to do so, let's create an LDC. And so instead of, I think what I had originally thought would happen is where either through the EDC or would sort of boost up the resources of the IDA to be able to continue on as sort of the lead agency here. It was, let's do this separate LDC and take over. And that really hasn't happened. So the IDA is still, filling in this vacuum gap, and I think should continue to do so. But, just looking ahead, this is what, August, by the time the LDC even starts, and then trying to get staff and it could be the end of the year. And, I think it's just unfortunate that, again, as a community, we haven't worked as well together as we should have.
So how much, all that's true, Steve, couldn't
Yeah.
agree more. And finding an executive director that's gonna take the job for the amount that's being offered for a salary may take into the first quarter of next year. How much time does the board feel the IDA should continue to spend on this? A lot, a little? I mean, it could be, all right, off, not our job. If we say that, I think the thing will just languish.
Yeah.
Or the consulting firm, MRB, will say, okay, you didn't get a response, we'll go back to the drawing board, here's a proposal for another $250,000 to kind of redo it.
Redo what?
Reissue an RFP
Oh,
essentially.
Yeah, got it,
Yeah,
got
do
it,
a
got it.
do-over. It's a do-over of some kind. Again, I'm only guessing, I'm speculating at that
Wow.
point.
Surprising that it would cost that much to do over.
Well, the part that's missing is the getting on the phone call,
Yeah.
getting on the phone.
Yeah, I agree completely, and my opinion is that we should keep going. To try and bring other people up to speed, Sarah did an excellent job presenting the possibilities and the limitations to these guys that did the tour. And to try and get that much information into somebody else's head and the experience, particularly, Docs is going to be becoming more and less cooperative.
Correct.
From what I understand, they just don't want to have to deal with it anymore.
Right.
The other point I wanted to make was that OGS, kind of as expected, did the minimum perfunctory amount necessary just to put boards on the windows and put some antifreeze in some of the toilets, and people came back and used them again, so that when those buildings freeze this year, and there's a couple of them that have really serious moisture problems, which means they're going to have really serious mold problems very soon, that the asset is deteriorating rapidly. So, as we said last year, we don't have any time to waste on this. And as I understand from conversations we had, I think we can develop some outside teams to start making phone calls. I'm glad to be part of that.
Me too.
Because there's just so much work that has been done right now, but if you don't follow through on it with those phone calls, personally letting people know what is there,
It's not gonna
it's
happen.
just going to fall apart.
One other question. What's the level of confidence among this group or those that are informed about it, what's the level of confidence that the LDC will become operational?
Low. In the next year. It'll take a year. These are people that, there has never been an LDC before. No one that was interviewed has ever sat on the board of an LDC before. There is no executive director. And I look at that as another, the idea that Seneca County could use additional resources to focus on economic development is, I think, true, absolutely. We have the entire economic development team for the county's sitting here, and there's only 3 full-time paid people. So getting more bodies and throwing more at the problem is a good idea. It's just gonna take a while.
Isn't the LDC gonna be in direct competition to the IDA?
No, I don't think so. For instance, here's a good example. In other counties, there are both IDAs and LDCs. One of the things the LDC does is it creates the marketing engine that says, this is a better place to put your business. Now, we could be doing that too, I suppose, but we're doing a lot of other things too. But
Does that overlap with the Chamber of Commerce?
Chamber of Commerce is paid to do tourist promotion. They're 80% of their budget comes from the county's occupancy tax. If the county wishes to reallocate some of its occupancy tax, it could. But right now, the Chamber's job is to use the bulk of its income for tourist promotion. What that means is, you can take it a lot of different directions.
What I will say about LDCs is this. So we operate an LDC. Our Economic Development Corporation is an LDC. The reason that you see very little activity coming out of that organization is primarily funding issue. LDCs are not self-sustaining. There's not a model for that. Not that I've seen anyway. I think it's great that the county wants to invest resources and do that, and, they've set aside $250,000 from ARPA. The real question is the county gonna support in the long term and fully fund the LDC that they're creating? Because it will not generate enough income to operate on its own. That's just a fact. The IDA can with agency fees, and other counties where you see LDCs taking a very strong stance on economic development promotion, their staff are county employees, as in county government civil service employees. They staff the county economic development department. That staff also typically staffs the IDA and the LDC. The advantage of that model is that the personnel and the payroll and all of the biggest overhead expenses are covered through the county's budget. Then the IDA agency fees are essentially used to fund IDA investments, and they can also develop a contract between the IDA and the LDC for specific economic development projects. And then through that mechanism, the IDA is essentially putting some of its funds into the LDC for economic development marketing or downtown revitalization work, or whatever it is, but those have to be contracted specifically to do that. We don't have the luxury of being able to divert our agency fees in that way, because we have to be almost 100% self-sustaining as an IDA.
And to your point, I think the IDA has a very specific kind of role that's established for it, and the LDC has got a lot more latitude, I think, to raise money. It can solicit donations. It's got a much broader sort of funding portfolio, and together they each can perform a complementary function. That's my sense. As far as having the Willard project with the LDC, there's going to come a time when it's going to cost a lot of money to finally bring the Willard thing home, and the IDA doesn't have that money. It just doesn't have the money to do it. The county has the ability to get there, but we were not in a position to fund the whole process all the way through.
So was the Sessler person on a tour? Were they actually interested in doing something? I mean, they've done.
Bruce Sherman was there. The Sesslers did attend the first tour that we did back in January for the request for expressions of interest, so they have been to the site.
I think
They
that-
seem to have a level of interest.
Excuse
It
me, I have
remains
to
be
leave, so.
seen. Thanks, Ernie. It remains to be seen what exactly that interest sort of translates to, because obviously, we don't really know officially until we have a proposal in hand, and we don't have a proposal.
I'm afraid what you're gonna see happen is, there's two different things there. You have the lakefront, and then you have the old buildings.
Mhm.
If the old buildings get this historical designation, that is gonna double the cost to rebuild any of those buildings. Just right up front, because that's what happened in Seneca Falls. My daughter had a house here on, whatever, 5 and 20, going up toward Auburn. Needed new gutters.
Yep.
$6,000, the guy said, measure up the house, I'll give you a price, $6,000. Gave me the address, he said, oops, wait a minute, I've gotta go back and look, took him another day, came back $17,000 because you're in the historical district.
That's where the 50% tax credit comes in. You're absolutely right, Ralph.
Yeah.
It's absolutely right.
It's hard.
that-
But I
so-
think somebody's gonna want the lakefront, they do not want the old buildings, I don't think.
One of the risks, and this is what, we've talked to other possible partners in this. This is real estate brokers and so forth. They said what you want to avoid is having one entity come through to answer the RFP who says, I'll do the lakefront, and saying, okay, go do the lakefront, and we'll worry about the rest later.
Yeah.
Well, that's not gonna, I think the state of New York is not gonna let that happen. They don't wanna see that happen.
Sure.
Nor should anyone.
Right, I agree, yeah.
It's a low-hanging fruit.
That's
Yeah,
low hanging fruit.
exactly.
The issue with the historical piece, the fact that the property is eligible already means that it's gonna be expensive. So what a lot of people don't understand is that in order for the property to have been deemed eligible to be on the National Historic Register, there was a process to get that done. There was sort of an application, so to speak. That process immediately requires and triggers State Historic Preservation Office review now for anything that happens at the site.
And the idea is.
So it doesn't matter that it's not listed on the register, there's no additional review associated. That site already has all of the red tape that people associate with the historic preservation piece. The benefit of having it listed is that somebody then can access the tax credits in order to do the work on the site.
And the normal reaction to when historic preservation is invoked is nothing moves ever, and it just becomes even more historic all the time.
So it's not there.
However, we believe we hope, and we heard a little bit of this from the SHPO, whatever you call it, adjudicator, whatever her title is sometimes it's okay to take a building, tear it down, and put a plaque there that says, at one times here stood this, and this. I think
Yeah.
that to the extent that they are not, I mean, they understand they operate in a world of economic reality, you hope, and that there's some flexibility around what stays and what goes. And they will tell you, look, that's our job, and we're not trying to automatically put roadblocks up against sensible development. And I think there is enormous historical significance to that place. There are ways to preserve that without locking it into some piece of amber and leaving it the way it is for the rest of time.
But that's also why we hired, when we did the highest and best use study, we made sure MRB brought on historic preservation architects so that when they were evaluating the buildings, it was somebody that's familiar with dealing with SHPO and could sort of provide that context when they're giving recommendations on which buildings could maybe stay or which ones need to go. The other thing to keep in mind is that there was a building on the Willard campus that was listed on the National Register that was later demolished after it was on the register.
That was by the state.
By the state.
Yes, but there's precedent for things happening when it's something that's beyond salvageable is what I'm saying. I think there's,
So it does sound, Bruce, as you were saying earlier, that there's that person deciding what level of appearance of the building or function of the building. And if we could get some clarification, some guidelines on that, it would be really important.
Absolutely, so very much so. So the guy I spoke to from LaHinch, the Historic Preservation Office, said, look, there are individuals currently working for consulting firms. There's one he recommended who works for the firm EDR that they're like MRB, they're active in this area, who's done this kind of thing for 20 years. And her role is to help entities like ourselves answer those very questions in the context of what SHPO says and what the National Historic Register might say. To me, again, this is hire this firm for $150,000 to do some of that work. Do we do that? Well, the ARPA money is going to run out really quickly. And so those are the kinds of questions we're going to be looking at right now, is do we hire a consultant to work with SHPO, someone who knows how the gears work in that world, and at least get us to a point a year from now where we have a SHPO approved, shovel-ready preservationist site. Who's going to pay for that? And right now, I mean, I'm going to talk to that individual just to see what they do, but there will be a price tag coming. But someone's going to have to pay that. Because it's listed because it's eligible right now, that's inevitable right now. That's a process that's inevitable. And
But essential to making it shovel-ready also.
Yes, it's essential to making it shovel-ready. So that's an update.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, yeah. Thanks a lot. Thanks a million. Okay, next item. Sarah, your quarterly report.
okay, so, let's see. We'll start with maybe some of the usual updates for the quarterly report first. I know you guys aren't much of a fan of this part, but just to start with our business retention and expansion, So as a refresher, as of quarter one of this year, we had done 22 business visits. That number has since gone up to 45. Again, a reminder, our year-end goal is, 65 visits out in the business community.
What has the mood of the people you're talking to been? We're saying like the wineries are flat.
Oh, it's the same. I mean, our project pipeline, we have 35 projects that we're tracking, but I will say I went through, while doing this report and kind of reviewed them again, and there are more things on hold. There's more things that I kind of classified. So we have sort of leads, we have prospects, wins on hold, that sort of thing. Leads are sort of the most informal of them all. There are a lot more of those than of anything else, because it's people that in the past couple of years were like, oh yeah, we're thinking about doing this project or this expansion, and now things are a lot less concrete, projects are on hold, may not happen. It's something that we still want to keep note of and still want to sort of ask for updates on, but are not likely to result in projects. So really, of those 35 that we're tracking, I would say there are about 4 that I think have a strong that I think have a reasonable possibility of coming to this board within the next 2 years with a project application. And 2 years was sort of a timeline I think that we had talked about when we talked about trying to measure prospective income. So along that vein, of those 4 projects, I broke down for each one what I thought the percentage likelihood was of that project coming to the board with an application, getting approved, and closing within the next 2 years.
And how many hundreds and how many 20s did you have?
So there was an 80%, a 75%, a 60%, and a 25%. And again, those I'm just making, this completely arbitrary. This is based on my own opinion. But I took those percentages, I estimated what I thought the total agency fees would be for these projects. Took the agency fee for each project by the percentage to figure out what our projected revenue would be as of right now. So based on likelihood of project closing. That total amount came to what you see in the report, which was $618,900. Again, that's over
That's a 2-year.
2-year period.
That's our 2-year current revenue forecast, excluding,
It excludes Trelina.
and
That excludes the projects that we've approved this year, so excludes Groggery, not that that was a big agency fee, and it excludes the 2 Lodi solar projects that we have yet to close on that were approved by the board.
So that's really sort of a baseline revenue forecast for the next 2 years for the IDA, which is, if nothing else comes in, means we operate it.
And that's a 2-year number, right?
That's a
2
2-year
years,
number, so it's not
cut that
great.
in half. Cut that in half.
Not great when you consider that our Del Lago funds, this was the last year for that payment. And when you consider that our annual operating expenses are between $400,000 and $500,000 a year.
So
It could be worse, but it's definitely not a positive outlook.
some of the things that, this is something that Sarah and I have discussed. This is sort of the first time we're looking at this number. It's a good starting point to look at it. One of the other things that we covered several months ago, but we took, Sarah, and went through all the businesses in Seneca County and assigned them and tagged them by industry sector. We got the so-called NAICS code, which is the industry code for those businesses. And that's really the pool of existing businesses in the county that may or may not be willing to step up and take some of our incentives and build their business. So one of the initiatives here is to revisit that list and say, how many of these people have we called on? What is it exactly that's holding them up? And what do we need to do to get them over the hump? Is it a loan from the revolving loan fund? I don't know, we just need to get to know them better, I think. Because we can't operate at a loss annually. You know, we have to ignore the bluebirds, anything that flies through the window, that's nice, but we need to be able to cover our costs with basic operating revenue.
I will say that if these 4 projects actually move forward and close, obviously our actual income is likely to be higher than what I'm projecting here, again, because this is based on likelihood right now of the project moving forward. Other than that, just as a refresher, we have one project that's been fully approved this year. That was the Gregory project. We do have an application that was submitted a few months ago now, but they've still opted to wait to come before the board officially for an inducement resolution. That was the Savient Energy North Seneca Solar Project. They were waiting because they had been submitting an application to the state to get started on their approval process for utility scale, and wanted to make sure that everything was sort of buttoned up and complete on that before moving forward with this board. So that's still waiting in the wings.
In that survey that you were doing, we're probably not gonna have any heavy industry coming in here. We could have some light manufacturing coming in here. And then there's the tourist sector. But we're not so engaged in the tourist sector.
No, I mean, best made products, are that aluminum docks, Schrader Farms,
Mhm.
they're a meat processing. Those are, I think that's right now, that's the bread and butter here on this.
Keystone Mills.
Keystone Mills, yeah.
So of the projects, of the 4 that I mentioned, one is manufacturing, well, one is traditional manufacturing, one is agricultural manufacturing, one is tourism, hospitality, and one is transportation.
Where
So
do you
they're-
put solar in
it's
those?
spread.
Where do you put solar in that? Is that under agriculture?
No.
Can-
None of these are solar that I'm talking about. I did not actually include the Savient project in my 4 projects.
Yeah, I
because
understand. I'm just trying to figure out how.
It's utility scale and it's likely to be just as long as Trulina has been, and so I'm trying not to count on those as, revenue generators for us.
No, but I'm just thinking about sector identifying.
They would be utility, solar.
So that's a separate sector.
Separate sector.
Okay.
So that's those 4 projects. Again, we now have grant paperwork in hand that I need to review, but we do have as well the pass-through grant for Seneca Dairy Systems, but that's not expected to bring any kind of additional revenue to the agency. Only economic benefit to the community. As far as other updates
Can I ask
in
another
this
question?
report, yeah,
With the $10 million downtown revitalization,
yes.
that's probably all retail, correct? Or is there any opportunities for us in that?
It's unclear at this point. So where we are in the downtown revitalization, and just in case anybody didn't get a chance to read the report, so there's a few of us here that are part of that local planning committee. So Tom Murray, Jeff Shipley, and myself were all asked to serve on that. We've had a few meetings now. The last meeting we had, the consulting firm that is working with the state and with the village officials presented the projects that have applied. So we put out a few months ago now essentially an open call for project applications. Those folks submitted, and it was sort of a first perfunctory review of those projects. The way the DRI works is the village was awarded 10 million. It's actually a little less than 10 million that'll go out into the community. The other, I think, is to cover the cost of consulting and all those types of things. So it's a little over 9 million that gets allocated. The local planning committee has to evaluate projects and recommend a slate of projects for approval by the state. But we've been charged with actually recommending more than $10 million in projects. The state ultimately has the final say of which ones get funded. I think at our meeting, there was a significant amount of overage that was applied for. I wanna say it was like 17 or 20 million in total DRI funding that was applied for, Tom, do you remember? It was really high.
Close to 20.
So there's gonna be quite a few things that don't end up getting funded. There was a large number of public projects, which really isn't much of a space for the IDA to operate in. Although there's one that I'm wondering if there's a place maybe for the funding corp to assist if needed.
Yeah, so
Other
you're matching
than-
funds.
Other than that, the projects, if they're mixed use, there's this ability for the IDA to potentially help with a pilot agreement. If it's strictly retail, that obviously is a no-go, but if it's, you know, some small retail space in housing or commercial office space or something, we could potentially assist. A few of the major developers in the village of Waterloo are folks that have come to the IDA before and have active pilot agreements. Bob Stivers has pilot agreements active with the IDA for some properties. Who's the other one? HNJ Hospitality has some, or has an active pilot agreement with the IDA. So there is the potential for that, I think, as it's needed, but it's unclear yet what projects might come to us.
But there's still some potential there.
Some potential.
Okay.
So that's one of the updates I mentioned before the meeting started, but we did host Empire State Development. They did a consolidated funding application workshop. We had, you know, decent attendance. There were probably about 10 folks that came to hear more about those programs. We held it early July. The deadline for a lot of programs was July 31st, so it really is probably more an investment in the future in the sense that the people that came and got information, you know, might feel like applying for a program next year, but a lot of them will need more time to sort of develop projects and applications. The SBDC, which is based out of Onondaga County, will be coming out and hosting their Fast Track to Business training program that's really geared towards startups or very new businesses, small businesses. I believe Jeff Shipley is actually one of the presenters for that, and they've asked us for recommendations on other industry experts and things to bring in and, you know, talk about how to start up and run a business. Bruce has already mentioned Willard, so I think that's really more or less it for my report, unless people have questions or anything else.
Any questions?
So I got a question. Well, we talked about what to do with Willard. Did we come to any kind of decision? Are we gonna help make the phone calls, as Ben said, or are we gonna put some more money toward it? Or are we gonna just see what happens with the LDC?
No, we're gonna, well, my recommendation, Ralph, is that we devote meaningful time and energy to keeping the ball rolling here.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And that means number one.
Shall I make a motion to that effect?
I think
as
we
vague
should have
as that?
approval from everybody that we
Okay.
wanna do this,
Okay.
because
All right.
if we're gonna go someplace, let's go there with.
Everybody's eyes open, yeah, I
Okay.
agree, good point. So let's just talk about what does this entail? What this means is Sarah continuing to lead the Willard Task Force meetings and address the kind of the sticking points along the way, number one. And then number two is to begin to kind of do outreach, have the staff do outreach to prospective development partners. These are the little guys, these aren't the big fish, these are the little fish that are only asked to come forward so that the big fish have some sense of who might be out there to participate in the overall development.
Mhm.
So that would be the nature of the effort that we would put forward here.
Can I ask you a question about that? Does staff have the time to make those phone calls? I know Ben said he would be glad to help. That's probably the people that are on the workforce for the Willard.
Yes. Well, I can't speak for you, but, you know, Ben's a volunteer. There are members of the task force that are submitting, for instance, the application for listing on the National Registry of Historic Places they're not part of this organization,
Mhm.
but we're all kind of working in concert together.
And they're knowledgeable about the project, the site?
Yes.
So they can answer questions people
Yes.
have and give them good information?
Yes.
Yeah, so what we've talked about is if we're really gonna invest the time in this and essentially divide into marketing teams, is that we would essentially assign project lead to each team. And we would do a kickoff meeting probably in September. But again, a lot of this strategy is also predicated on having more time before the RFP deadline, means pushing it back most likely so that we really have time to do this right. But essentially doing a training in early September, get everybody the same talking points, and then the goal of that is to actually have each team not just contact developers, but to flesh out the pitch to those developers as well, because obviously we have a lot of information from the highest and best use study, but it's not right now necessarily tailored individually to each different type of development or type of business that could go there. We really need to make the case of, this is why, this is the case for housing, this is how you can be successful doing it. So that is part of this plan, and if we can successfully divide and conquer, then yes, I think it's manageable for staff. I mean, quite frankly, we're already spending the majority of our time on Willard, and there's a lot of moving pieces. I mean, as Bruce said, there's the State Historic Preservation Office, there's complications with docs now coming up and, having access to the site, and their willingness to allow us to get it on the register is turning into a sticking point. There's zoning things, there's all kinds of stuff that we're trying to navigate and push people through, and it's very time consuming.
For instance, in order to get it listed on the National Register, you have to have the current owner apply.
They have to consent at least.
So it's like the warden at 5 Points, is he the current owner, or is it the commissioner of Department of Corrections, is he or she the owner? I mean, this is the devil being in the details, as you know about these things.
Okay.
So if there's would anyone like to make a motion giving the staff the latitude to continue to make this effort? Tom?
I have a question about the money.
Okay?
So Sarah, you've applied for a $100,000 budget request from the county this year. And what I'm understanding is that the new budget finance person, Supervisor Partee, is telling all the agencies to hold where they are this year because her budget will be quite a bit tighter and the funds based on sales tax is going to be less. Has she given you the LDC or you any indication that there'll be more funds available to you or to the LDC? Because that money will run out soon if you're going to spend more time on this and not allocate resources to what we're, initially doing. I haven't heard anything.
Yeah, I've looked into that, Tom.
Yeah.
And right now, the answer is, come back next year for that extra. Not this year. So that means the point here is we used to be housed in county real estate space, some of those costs being covered by the county. In order to really balance that out, now that we're over here, is the request went into the county for a little bit more allocation. Instead of 50, it went to 100. There's no indication that it will be anything more than 50.
So the revenue sources for all these extra
Well, right now,
will
we're
be
talking
chewed
about,
up pretty quick.
we're not gonna spend any more, we're gonna spend time.
time.
And yes, it will, I think, definitely affect time spent on other projects,
Mhm.
definitely.
Yeah. It's just not long-term sustainable.
No, but I guess no.
But essentially, this is really sort of a bridge through the year. Until
Yeah, if we
find
don't have
out more.
results in a year, it's like game over.
Well, if there's no LDC or if everything else, then something has to be, revisited type of thing. But definitely, you say, for now, through the end of the year, definitely, support the IDA doing this. To me, it just brings back, like the cemetery again, where the county didn't want any part of the cemetery, so the IDA fell on the sword and took over the cemetery and did the work until the county took it up 10 years later.
That ended up being $1 million number.
And it was $1 million thing.
And
So,
I mean, this is
Meaning
more- I
out
mean,
of the IDA?
yes,
Technically out of the EDC,
Yeah.
but yes, that was close to $1 million that will
Yeah.
never
Was
be
it-
recouped,
never
that if
be.
it still existed within that agency, could have very well been used for
Yeah.
things like this.
And in light of what's ultimately happened to the cemetery, you know, no one's giving any credit to the IDA for making it possible to keep it alive until it's
That's
been
right.
designated as a New York
Well,
State veteran cemetery. Forget about credit.
yeah.
You know, my sense is, this is maybe a 6-month at most undertaking. Thank you, Seth.
Yeah.
6 month at most. After 6 months, it's either,
Well, by then presumably you could transfer it over to the county EDC,
yeah.
The LDC.
LDC, one of those DCs.
If it's there.
Right.
I think that's pretty,
I have no
I think,
faith-
honestly, I
no
think
faith
that's
the
a pretty
county's gonna
rosy
get it
picture
done.
to paint that it'll actually have
And
a
if
role
it's-
to play in Willard. I don't think it'll effectively be operational, or that they'll have the experience between the board and the staff necessary to really do any heavy lifting in regards to Willard
So
redevelopment.
if credit or not, it falls to us if we want to see that project go forward.
Yes. And certainly, I would not expect any credit for the IDA. It's pretty much,
Yeah, no, it's not that.
we're not doing this with that expectation at all.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So you're asking for approval for the end of the year,
6 months.
6 months.
Yeah, I think if we're gonna get the RFP extended, it would have to be past the holiday period in sometime in the
Yeah.
early part of next
Yeah.
year.
As people are looking, they're planning out their year
Yeah,
ahead.
so, I mean, there's an election, interest rates are different, you know, someone might be looking at the whole world differently in January than they are in July
So-
of this month, or August of this year.
I don't know, do we still have a quorum?
Yes.
So I'll make a proposal that we continue at the same rate we are currently spending time and effort in development of Willard for the next 6 months.
That's a motion?
That's a motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Ralph. Any other business? All right, a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
We do need to have a brief funding court meeting, which I forgot about when I said I could sign documents, but I can sign them when we meet if you want, if you need the account. Okay. And Ben, I can still chat with you if you want to hang out
Oh,
and do the
I'm-
funding court
I'm-
meeting.
It should be a 5-minute.
Plenty of time.
court meeting. Welcome to the August meeting of the Seneca County Funding Corporation. We have a quorum, so we'll get started. First item of business is approval of the meeting minutes from March 21st, 2024.
I would so move.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carried. Second item is the Governance Committee report.
Okay, so the governance committee met late last year and reviewed the established policies for the agency and also nominated officers for 2024. So this report is acknowledging that work by the governance committee, but there's no action needed on this particular item. But that being said, it does segue us into our actual action item, which is full funding Corp board approval of the policies. For some reason, we could not find a record that we had done an actual funding Corp meeting. We had just done the governance committee meeting. So these policies have been reviewed and recommended for approval by you all as that entity. But again, it's our, audit committee, charter, bylaws, code of ethics, so on and so forth. There were no recommended changes to any of our policies this year for the funding Corp.
Okay. Next item is, the official election of officers for 2024.
We'll need a vote on the policy approval.
Oh,
Yeah, just a voice vote.
motion to approve the policies for this year.
So moved.
I'll second. All in favor? Aye. Okay. Motion carried. So we also have the
Election
governance,
of officer.
governance committee self-evaluation, which you have, in your
Yeah, which
packet.
is this, I guess that we went out of order, because I talked about this before we did the approval policies, but yes, this is just for the information.
We have, election of officers for this year. We had, myself as chair, Bruce is vice chair, and Bob is secretary treasurer. I believe that was. So motion to approve that officer slate.
So moved.
I'll second. Kelly? Oh, no, just a voice.
Just voice.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? No. Motion carried. Committee appointments for 2024, since it's such a small, everyone's on every committee. So that's a nice, easy one to do. So a motion to approve everyone's attendance on all the committees.
So moved.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carried. Then we have a series of resolutions.
So the first resolution, I don't know that we'll actually.
Did Bruce leave? Or did you just?
Let's talk about the second group of resolutions
Yes.
while Dave checks. Okay, so the second group of resolutions is approving check signatures, authorizing the chairman, the vice chairman, the secretary, the treasurer, the executive director, which is the same as the CEO. I'm not sure why we have that twice, but anyway. Oh, CFO, I think is what it was meant to
Yes.
say, to sign checks. The next resolution in this group is designating the Halpin firm as the legal counsel for the funding corporation. The next one is designating Raymond F. Wagner, CPA, Division of Mengel Metzger Bar and Company, as the auditor for the corporation. And then finally, appointing myself, Sarah Davis, as CEO and CFO of the funding corp.
So, unless there's any objection, I'd like to vote on this group as a group. So I'd like a motion to approve this group to the 4 separate resolutions.
So moved.
I'll second. Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray, absent. Motion carried.
Okay, so Bruce is gone, so I don't think we can vote on the first one because we would need, we have a quorum here, but they're 50-50. Bob can't vote on the banking institution, so we'll
Yeah.
have to wait on that, correct?
Right.
Okay, that's all right.
Then we just need to hand in the annual disclosure form.
And that That's it.
And no other business? Yeah, no executive session, so we have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?